After being together for over 18 years, Ray Ellis, our choir director, and Randy Kennedy, our church administrator, were married last Sunday. We would congratulate them, but only Randy is here today. As some of you know, Ray is on his honeymoon with my wife, Sherry. What can I say? It's the Asbury way. Actually, Ray is in New York City with 35 of his high school students, and Sherry is one of the chaperones. And so the question is, who is chaperoning Ray and Sherry? Ministers sometimes call today Sheep Sunday. On the fourth Sunday of Easter, the common lectionary always uses biblical passages that have to do with sheep or shepherds. The 23rd Psalm, for instance, is always the Psalter text on this particular Sunday. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In fact, the liturgical name for the fourth Sunday of Easter is Good Shepherd Sunday. You may recall that last Sunday's text was about Jesus coming to his disciples after his death and resurrection. And he comes to Peter and tells Peter to feed his sheep, to be in ministry. The Good Shepherd is encouraging Peter to follow in his footsteps and to become a shepherd himself to others. Our text today is from the book of Acts, and we see that Peter is being a very good shepherd indeed. As you good Bible scholars know, the book of Acts was written by the same person who wrote the book of the Gospel of Luke. The book of Acts is a sequel to the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Luke is about Jesus and his ministry. The book of Acts is about the disciples becoming leaders and forming and developing what eventually becomes the early Christian church, which, by the way, was originally called, do you know? The Way. That's what the early Christians called it, the Way. Those who wanted to follow the way of Christ. Those who tried to follow his teachings and the way he lived. In our story today, Peter does the ultimate impression of Christ as he brings a deceased woman back to life. Did you know that Peter did that? I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't know about this particular story. It doesn't get much press. Not like the resurrection of Lazarus. Why isn't this woman's resurrection as popular as that of Lazarus? Why don't we hear about it more? Is it because she was a she and not a he? Is it because the story is in the book of Acts instead of one of the great four Gospels? Or is it because Peter does the raising instead of Jesus? What do we do with that? We have enough trouble believing these resurrection stories as it is. You may struggle with the raising of Lazarus, but at least Jesus did that one. Jesus is Jesus. This is Peter. He's like you and me. We pray for people who are sick and dying all the time, and they usually die. Miracles happen from time to time, probably more than we know, but we do not see a person go into a room with someone who is dying, pray for them, and have them come back to life. Doesn't happen. There are some Christians who claim that miracles like this do in fact continue to happen. Some charismatic and Pentecostal Christians would argue that the Spirit empowers the faithful today in the same ways that the Spirit empowered the Christians in the book of Acts. Other Christians would argue that these miracles were not meant to extend beyond the apostolic period. That is, that miracles like this were signs of God's special blessing on those who were the architects of the early church, those who bridged the gap between Jesus and us. Still, other Christians would question whether or not such supernatural events ever happened at all. There's not much in our experience today to lead credence to these old stories. And if God could heal and raise people from the dead back then, why doesn't it happen now? Why would God tease us with such blessings and then take them away, leaving us to fend for ourselves against death and disease? Good questions, important questions need to be asked. And they arise from a literal reading of the text. But we United Methodists know that literal readings are not the only way to approach the Bible. Unfortunately, many Christians don't know that it's okay to read the Bible metaphorically instead of literally. They feel that if they don't read it literally, they are being unfaithful to God. They don't realize that biblical literalism is a very modern approach to reading the Bible, that they are doing something radically different from the writer's original intentions. Biblical literalism only started about 200 years ago with the Enlightenment. It was in the 18th century when science took the lead role and people started to identify truth with factuality. But from the very beginning of Christianity up to the 18th century, the scriptures have been understood as a very complex mix of history and metaphor and allegory and symbolic writings that reflect the relationship between the Creator and creation. Our preoccupation with whether an event really happened would seem pretty strange to these early church communities. Now, since many people aren't aware of this, they secretly think to themselves that these stories are kind of ridiculous and irrelevant, and so the church is ridiculous and irrelevant, and they leave or never attend church. Biblical scholar Marcus Borg said that in the last half century, more Christians have left the church because of the Bible than for any other single reason. Borg would say that they are missing the point, that we're doing ourselves a disservice by not seeing parts of the Bible as metaphor and allegory, because more truth, bigger truth, is revealed by metaphor than by literal interpretations. The word metaphor, in fact, means beyond words. Meta means beyond. For, P-H-O-R, means word. It's beyond words. Another thing to keep in mind when reading stories from the Bible is that whenever you are dealing with ancient text, names are very important. They have significance. Adam, for instance, means earth. Abraham means father of nations. Jesus, which comes from the name Yahshua, means Yahweh, or Yahweh saves. It's no coincidence that the name given to the father of Jesus is Joseph. Remember Joseph in the Hebrew scriptures, who dreamed dreams and ended up in Egypt? The Joseph of the New Testament, what'd he do? He dreamed dreams, and where'd he end up? In Egypt. And he would be the father of the new Moses, the one who would save his people, just as Moses saved the Israelites. It's all in a name. And that's why it's so disconcerting that in many biblical stories, the women are nameless. Their names are often not given, which reveals so much about the patriarchal culture of that time. Women had no power, no worth, viewed as property. And so it's very significant that in our text today, the main woman in the story is not only named, she is named twice. We are given her Aramaic name, her Jewish name, which is Tabitha, and we are given her Greek name, which is Dorcas. 2 names this woman is given. This is one special lady. In fact, she is the only woman in the Bible designated as a disciple of Jesus. That's a good trivia question, by the way. Now, we know there were other women who followed Jesus who were his disciples, but Tabitha, Dorcas, is the only woman where it is specifically said that she is a disciple. To overcome the patriarchy, to have this kind of acknowledgement during this time period, means that this woman was extraordinary. And indeed, Tabitha is known for her good works and her acts of charity. In fact, her name Tabitha and Dorcas literally means gazelle, which of course is an antelope, an animal known for its beauty, its grace, and its gentleness. But good people get sick and die too. Tabitha's death is so hard for her faith community. This gazelle did so many good and important things for others. And so those in her faith community take her death hard, and they want to do all they can do. They take care of her body, they wash her, and they lay her in a room upstairs. And then they learn that Peter is in a town about 10 miles away, and so the congregation decides that they need his presence. And so 2 people are willing to go look for him. And when they find him, they say, "Please come with us. Please don't delay. We need you." And so Peter goes with them. And when they arrive in the town of Joppa, they take Peter to the room upstairs. The widows in the faith community are gathered there weeping. And they show Peter things that Tabitha had done for them. They show him the tunics and the clothing she made for everyone. She had impacted so many lives. In fact, by giving us both her Jewish and Gentile name, the story seems to imply that this gazelle helped all kinds of people, that she had no boundaries. Peter asks to be alone with Tabitha, and when everyone is outside, he kneels down and prays. He turns to the body and says, "Tabitha, get up." She opens her eyes. She sees Peter. She sits up, and then he extends his hand to her and helps her to stand. Peter did that. Did you know that there is actually something called a Dorcas gazelle? A Dorcas antelope? The writer of the book of Acts would have known that the mere mention of a Dorcas gazelle would have conjured up images of great religious controversy. Gazelles symbolize a strange sort of boundary when it came to Jewish dietary laws. You see, gazelles are 4-footed animals that chew its cud. This puts the gazelle in a category known as clean, which means they can be eaten. But the gazelle is not a domesticated domesticated animal, and wild animals could not be eaten with any religious rite. Here was an animal that was deemed clean on one hand, but needed to be kept away from religious ceremonies. And here is a story that occurs in the town of Joppa in the diaspora, where Jews and Gentiles are mixing. And the early Christians are in a quandary. How do we deal with Gentiles, with Gentile converts? Are they accepted? Could the uncircumcised come to the table and eat with us? Something else about a gazelle. You know, they don't have to drink water to survive. Have you ever heard of such? It's remarkable. Today we know now that they are able to get water through leaves. Plus, they are able to shrink their liver and their heart to reduce oxygen consumption during times of drought. But to the ancient person, it must have been miraculous that this animal did not need water. It's as if it had its own well. What was Jesus known as during this time? Living water. That's who he was. And so was Tabitha. So was Dorcas. This gazelle was an embodiment of Christ. She was pointing the way at how we should deal with boundaries. And so this story is not just about the resurrection of one person. It's about the gift of divine life being extended beyond the boundaries of Jewish religious rite. Jewish religious life. It's about new life given to people, to Gentiles and to Jews. You see, this story is all about resurrections. And it calls us to be agents of resurrections. Peter isn't the only shepherd in this story. This resurrection didn't happen just because of him. There were shepherds who lovingly took care of Tabitha's body. There were shepherds who decided that Peter should be present. There were shepherds who were willing to go looking for Peter. There were shepherds who brought all of the tunics and clothing Tabitha had made together. There were shepherds who shed communal tears. There were shepherds who waited prayerfully outside the room while Peter was with their friend. Shepherds ready to be called back to Tabitha's side. This resurrection happened because of a community. The congregation at Joppa was made up of a bunch of shepherds who stood together using all of the tools and spiritual resources available to them, working together, weeping together, hoping together, and celebrating together. Peter was a part of the raising of Tabitha, but it would have never happened. It would have never happened had it not been for these other shepherds. It was a communal healing, a communal resurrection. And I was thinking all week about Bob Osborne's memorial service. In fact, the last month of his life or so. This great usher of ours. By the way, did you know that the Aramaic word for Bob means outstanding usher? Just discovered that this week. But if you've been involved here this last month, you know what I'm talking about. And his memorial service certainly didn't feel like a funeral. It was a service of resurrection. And people helped this experience of resurrection in so many different ways. We had people in the parking lot helping visitors and our members into the church. We had ushers and greeters. We had the hospitality team working hard on the meal afterwards. We had the choir singing incredible music. It was a resurrection. That's what happened in Joppa. It was a communal healing. And we were all healed last Saturday. Resurrection acts look different from one another, but they all have the same restorative, redemptive goal of helping people move forward toward life and love. A word of kindness to someone. Looking into the eyes of people who aren't honored with eye contact. Time spent with someone to really hear them and support them. An act of service to lift someone up to a new level. Money donated to worthy projects to help others. Volunteering time to help children and youth. These are all works of resurrection. All are to restore others. The paradox, however, is that when we think and live this way, we find ourselves becoming more and more alive. More and more redeemed, more and more resurrected in the process. Last Sunday, I was the last to leave the church building, or at least I thought I was. I had finished with our confirmation class. The youth were picked up by their parents, and I came into the sanctuary to make sure the lights were out, but I heard great music. It was Kelly practicing a song she played at Randy and Ray's wedding, Embraceable You, which happens to be one of my favorite songs, and it sounded incredible, and I said, I can't wait to hear this at the wedding. We'll see you in an hour or so. Well, I didn't realize this song was being played right before the ceremony started, so I missed it. And I grieved about that. So I put it into the service today for the offertory. And then I said, how am I going to fit this in? Having Kelly play Embraceable You. And by the way, our flowers today are for Lillian Lindsay, the late Lillian Lindsay's birthday, and she would have liked Embraceable You being played today too. But anyway, during my study of the week, I happened to come across this commentary on our text today. Listen to what the writer says. I got it in. Personally, the writer says, I cannot hear this story without marveling over the remarkable power of touch. I suspect most of us take human contact for granted. But there are others, such as some elderly people who live alone and rarely leave home, who may go a whole day or even a week without human touch. And yet our bodies are made for touch, with our skin being our body's largest organ. There are as many as 5 million touch receptors in our skin, 3,000 in a single fingertip. Touch is the first sense humans develop and the last to fade. While touch can heal, we cannot ignore its power to harm. Statistics suggest that 1 out of 3 girls and 1 in 4 boys will be victims of molestation. Sadly, human touch can cause significant damage to the lives of individuals. Yet, its power to comfort, to support, to transform and heal is even greater. When Helen Keller, the commentary goes on to see, was a deaf-mute child imprisoned in darkness and void, her teacher, Annie Sullivan, broke through to Helen through touch by putting Helen's hand under the water pump and signing W-A-T-E-R over and over again. Annie broke through to Helen, unlocking one of the brightest minds of the 20th century. Touch became Helen's lifeline to learning, communicating, understanding, and interacting with the world. In her 20s, a woman named Sue Monk Kidd was a young nurse, inexperienced in suffering. But one afternoon, she witnessed the doctor's grim face as he entered the room of one of her patients. He said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Kelsey. You have cancer, and we should operate right away." And when the doctor left, Mr. Kelsey stared at the window in silence, and Sue noticed he was trembling. She wanted to comfort him, but no words came, and instinctively she simply placed her hand on his shoulder while rummaging for something to say. With glistening eyes, Mr. Kelsey looked up at her, placed one hand on hers, and whispered, "Thank you." And Sue thought, for what? Could such a small gesture communicate so much? She will never forget that moment when she learned never to underestimate the remarkable power of touch. Frederick Buechner, the great theologian, writes, "Through simply touch, more directly than any other way, we can transmit to each other something of the power of the life we have inside of us." It is no wonder that the laying on of hands has always been a traditional part of healing and of ordination, or that when Jesus was around, all the crowd sought to touch him. It is no wonder that just the touch of another human being at a dark time can be enough to save the day. The bottom line is this: wherever there are people who are willing to be shepherds, God can perform miracles. There can be new life. Where you sense the presence of death, may you choose to allow the presence of life to flow through you to them. The power of resurrection is available. It's at your fingertips, in your veins, and so let it flow. So we can be shepherds and gazelles. Amen and amen. Thank you for being here today to worship together. What a great people you are. What a great congregation this is. I want to tell you, you may be interested in this. At 2 o'clock today, Rabbi Robert Hoss is getting married. And many of you know Robert. He's the rabbi at Congregation Mikveh Israel, and he's preached here at Asbury on several occasions. You know, Robert's in his 40s. It's the first time he's been getting married. We've had a lot of Jewish mothers been trying to find him a bride. And we're all excited that he found April, and he's excited too. So keep them in your prayers. That's 2 o'clock today. Now let us go forth to be shepherds. Let us go forth to be gazelles, touching, loving others, extending our boundaries to all people. In the name of God the Creator, in Christ the Redeemer, and the Holy Spirit.